The mahogany conference table that Margaret and I bought together 30 years ago felt cold beneath my trembling hands. 3 days after burying my wife of 45 years, I sat surrounded by family who suddenly looked like strangers. My daughter-in-law Sandra leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the documents. "Now that the old woman is gone," she announced with a smile that never reached her eyes, "you'll put the company in my son's name and fend for yourself." My heart stopped. Margaret warned me. I should have listened. 1 week before Margaret passed, I found her in my home office, surrounded by boxes of documents and recordings. The cancer had taken so much from her already, but her eyes burned with a determination I hadn't seen in months. "Leo," she said, gesturing for me to close the door behind me. "We need to talk about Sandra." Shot. I sank into the leather chair across from her desk, the same one where we'd built our aerospace technology company from nothing into an empire worth $50 million. "What about her?" Margaret pushed a small digital recorder across the desk. "Listen to this." Sandra's voice filled the room, talking to someone on the phone. "Once the old bat kicks the bucket, Thomas inherits everything. Then we transfer it all before dumping him. He's too stupid to see it coming." My blood ran cold. Thomas, our only son, had married Sandra 15 years ago. She'd always been ambitious, but this... "There's more," Margaret continued, her frail hands surprisingly steady as she handed me a thick folder. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago when I noticed money disappearing from Thomas's personal accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, always just below the threshold that would trigger alerts. I flipped through bank statements, photographs, and typed reports. Each page revealed another layer of deception. Sandra had been building her own empire using our son's resources, slowly poisoning his mind against us in the process. She found out about the company's true value last year," Margaret explained. "Remember when Thomas asked for the financial audit? That wasn't his idea. Look at page 47. The audit request email was there, but the metadata showed it originated from Sandra's laptop, not Thomas's. My chest tightened as I realized how deep this went. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because you would have confronted them immediately, and we'd have lost any chance of protecting Thomas and James." She mentioned our 18-year-old grandson, and her voice cracked slightly. "That boy is caught in the middle of this mess." A knock at the door interrupted us. My brother Frank entered, his judge's instincts immediately picking up on the tension. "Everything all right?" he asked, his 65-year-old frame still imposing despite retirement. Margaret and I exchanged glances. "Family troubles," I said carefully. "Nothing we can't handle." Frank's eyes narrowed. He'd presided over enough cases to recognize when people were hiding something significant. "If you need legal advice, you know where to find me." After he left, Margaret pulled out a small locked box from beneath her desk. "Everything you need is in here. The recordings, the investigators' reports, and something else. Something I discovered last month that changes everything." She placed a brass key in my palm, closing my fingers around it. "Promise me, Leo. Promise you'll protect what we've built. Not just the company, but our family's legacy. Thomas is weak, but he's still our son. And James? That boy doesn't deserve what's coming." "What do you mean, what's coming?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained strong. "Sandra's planning something big. The investigator overheard her talking about a family meeting after I'm gone. She's going to make her move then. You need to be ready." "We should tell Thomas now," I insisted. "No." Her grip on my hand tightened. "He won't believe us. She's spent years turning him against us, making him think we're controlling, that we don't trust him. If we move too soon, we'll lose him forever." She was right, of course. Over the past few years, Thomas had grown distant, missing family dinners, avoiding conversations about the business. Every interaction felt strained, like he was performing a role someone else had written for him. "There's one more thing," Margaret whispered, glancing at the door. "My last conversation with the investigator. He said to tell you these exact words: the truth about James will destroy her, but it might save your son." Before I could ask what that meant, Margaret's exhaustion overtook her. I helped her back to bed, the weight of her revelations pressing down on my shoulders. As I tucked her in, she gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "My final gift to you is time, Leo. Use it wisely. And remember, sometimes the best warriors are the ones who appear the weakest." Those were the last coherent words my wife spoke to me. The cancer claimed her voice the next day, and her life 6 days later. But her warning echoed in my mind as I sat at our conference table staring at Sandra's predatory smile. "Did you hear me, Leo?" Sandra's sharp voice cut through my memories. "The company needs fresh leadership. Thomas has been preparing for this his whole life." I glanced at my son, slumped in his chair, his eyes glazed and unfocused. He'd been preparing for something all right, but it wasn't leadership. The boy who once dreamed of designing spacecraft now looked like a puppet with cut strings. "I heard you," I replied quietly, my fingers finding the key Margaret had given me, now hanging around my neck beneath my shirt. "I heard everything." The morning of Margaret's funeral dawned gray and miserable, matching the hollow ache in my chest. Hundreds of people filled the cathedral, a testament to the life she'd touched through our company and charitable work. I stood at the entrance, accepting condolences, when I overheard Sandra speaking to her sister near the coat room. "Finally," Sandra hissed, apparently unaware that the acoustics carried her voice. "Do you know how long I've waited for this? 5 more days and everything transfers? Then I'm done with this pathetic family." Her sister, a woman I'd met only twice before, laughed softly. "What about Thomas? What about him? He's served his purpose. My lawyer says with the mental health documentation I've been building, I can take everything in the divorce. The idiot doesn't even realize I've been recording his drinking episodes and creating a paper trail of instability." My fists clenched, but I forced myself to remain calm, greeting the next mourner with a sad smile, while my mind raced. Mental health documentation. Thomas had been struggling lately, but now I understood why. She'd been orchestrating his breakdown. During the service, I watched Sandra perform the role of grieving daughter-in-law perfectly. She dabbed at dry eyes, held Thomas's hand when people were watching, and even delivered a short eulogy about Margaret's kindness. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. James sat beside me, his young face etched with genuine sorrow. He'd loved his grandmother deeply, spending summers at our house, learning about aerospace engineering, and listening to Margaret's stories about building the company. Halfway through the service, he leaned close. "Grandpa," he whispered, "something's wrong with Dad. He's been acting strange all week. Different medications keep appearing in the bathroom, and Mom keeps giving him these protein shakes that make him drowsy." I patted his shoulder, filing this information away. "We'll talk later, son. Today is about your grandmother." After the burial, as people gathered at our house for the reception, I slipped away to my study. The private investigator Margaret had hired a former FBI agent named Robert Carlson was waiting for me. "Mr. Turner," he said, standing as I entered, "I'm sorry for your loss. Margaret was a remarkable woman." "She was," I agreed, locking the door behind me. "What do you have for me?" Robert pulled out a tablet, swiping through files. "Your daughter-in-law has been busy. In the last 72 hours, she's made multiple calls to a Derek Morrison. He's Thomas's business partner in that restaurant venture from 3 years ago. The one that failed. That's what they wanted everyone to think. In reality, Derek and Sandra have been siphoning money from it into offshore accounts. But that's not the interesting part." He showed me a series of photographs. These were taken over the last 6 months. The images showed Sandra and Derek in various compromising situations. Hotels, restaurants, even in a car parked behind Thomas's office building. My heart sank for my son. "There's more," Robert continued. "I've been monitoring her communications. She's arranged a family meeting for this Thursday, 2 days before the official will reading. She's bringing her brother, an attorney named Paul Garrett, who's been disbarred twice, but still practices under the radar. What's her plan? Based on intercepted emails, she intends to present documents suggesting you're mentally incompetent. She's gathered selective video clips of you forgetting names at company events, mixed up some of your prescription medications to create confusion, and even has a doctor ready to testify about age-related cognitive decline. I sank into my chair. The woman had been planning this for years, not months. What about the will? That's where it gets interesting. Sandra believes Margaret left everything to Thomas directly. She doesn't know about the trust restructuring you both did 2 years ago. She also doesn't know that Margaret added some very specific conditions to the inheritance. Shumosanarm. A knock at the door interrupted us. Grandpa, James's voice called out. Mom's looking for you. She says we need to discuss funeral expenses. Tell her I'll be right there. I replied, then turned back to Robert. Anything else I should know? His expression darkened. This is delicate, Mr. Turner. Margaret asked me to investigate James's parentage after she noticed some discrepancies in old medical records. The results are in that locked box she left you. My hand instinctively went to the key around my neck. Are you saying... I'm saying you should open that box before Thursday's meeting. And Mr. Turner, be very careful. I've seen Sandra's type before. When cornered, they become dangerous. Margaret knew this, which is why she insisted on installing those security cameras throughout your house last spring. After Robert left through the back entrance, I rejoined the reception. Sandra approached immediately, her face a mask of false concern. Leo, you poor thing. You look exhausted. Thomas and I were discussing how hard this must be for you handling everything alone. Perhaps it's time to let the younger generation take some responsibility. I played my part, letting my shoulders droop. Perhaps you're right, Sandra. It's been very difficult. Her eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. We should meet this week to discuss the transition. Thursday would be perfect. Just family, very informal. We can handle all this without involving lawyers and complications. That sounds reasonable, I replied, noting how Thomas stood behind her like a shadow, his expression vacant. Thursday it is. As she walked away, James caught my eye from across the room. He held up his phone slightly, and I understood. Whatever his mother was planning, her son might be our unexpected ally. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of condolences and memories. But as the sun set and the last guest departed, I stood in Margaret's greenhouse, surrounded by her orchids. The funeral director, an old friend named William, approached with an envelope. Mr. Turner, your wife left instructions for me to give you this after the service, he said quietly. She was very specific about the timing. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Margaret's handwriting and a small key taped to the bottom. My dearest Leo, if you're reading this, then Sandra has begun her final move. The small key opens a safety deposit box at First National number 447. Everything inside will help you protect our family. I've watched you build rockets that touch the stars, but now you must be cunning like a fox. Let her think she's won. The cameras recorded everything, including her visits to my hospital room. Yes, I knew she was coming. The nurse was instructed to document everything. Be the confused old man she expects, then strike when she least expects it. All my love, Margaret. P.S. Tell James I'm proud of him. He has more courage than his father, and he'll need it for what's coming. I pocketed both keys and walked back to the house. Through the kitchen window, I saw Sandra on her phone, gesturing animatedly. She thought she'd won already. She had no idea that Margaret had been playing a longer game, one that would soon reveal itself in ways none of us expected. That night, as I prepared for bed in our empty room, I found myself talking to Margaret's picture. You always were smarter than all of us, weren't you? Don't worry, my love. I'll protect them. Even Thomas, despite everything. The investigation into James's parentage would wait until tomorrow. Tonight I needed to grieve my wife and prepare for the battle she'd seen coming long before any of us. Sandra had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated both Margaret's intelligence and the lengths a grandfather would go to protect his family. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the October sun beating down as I prepared for Sandra's meeting. I'd spent the previous day at the bank reviewing the contents of Margaret's safety deposit box. The revelations inside had left me shaken, but determined. Now I methodically activated the recording devices Margaret had installed throughout our home, checking each camera angle on my phone. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sandra arrived with her entourage. Her brother Paul, the disbarred attorney, looked like he'd stepped out of a bad legal drama, complete with an ill-fitting suit and briefcase that had seen better days. 2 women I didn't recognize followed them in introduced as witnesses to ensure everything is handled properly. Thomas shuffled in last, his movements sluggish. His once bright eyes were dull, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he sat down. Sandra immediately produced a protein shake from her purse. "Here, honey. You forgot your afternoon supplement," she cooed, pressing the bottle into his hands. "I'm not thirsty," Thomas mumbled. "Don't be silly. Dr. Morrison said you need to take these regularly for your condition." She watched until he drank half the bottle, then turned her attention to me. I let my hand shake visibly as I poured water from the pitcher, deliberately spilling some on the table. "Oh dear, I'm sorry. My hands aren't what they used to be." Sandra exchanged a satisfied look with her brother. They thought they had me exactly where they wanted me. "Leo," Paul began spreading documents across the table. "We're here to discuss the future of Turner Aerospace Technologies. As you know, Thomas is the rightful heir to the company, and given recent concerns about your capacity to manage such a complex operation." "Concerns?" I asked, blinking slowly. "What concerns?" Sandra leaned forward. "Leo, we've all noticed you've been struggling. Forgetting important meetings, confusing numbers and reports. Just last month you called Thomas by your brother's name 3 times in one conversation. That was true, but only because I'd discovered Thomas had been secretly meeting with Frank to discuss his marriage problems. The slip had been emotional, not cognitive, but I played along. I don't remember that," I said, fumbling with my glasses. Paul pushed a document toward me. "This is a cognitive evaluation from Dr. Morrison stating that you're showing signs of severe decline. For the good of the company and your own well-being, we think it's best if you sign over control to Thomas immediately." Dr. Morrison, the same Derek Morrison who was having an affair with Sandra. The audacity was breathtaking. "I should probably have my lawyer look at this," I suggested weakly. "No need for that," Sandra said quickly. "We're family. Lawyers will just complicate things and cost money. Besides, Harold is probably busy with other clients. You wouldn't want to bother him." Interesting. She knew Harold Brennan was my attorney, which meant she'd been doing her homework. What she didn't know was that Harold and I had served together in Vietnam and that he'd cleared his entire schedule for the next week at my request. I pretended to read the documents, occasionally asking them to explain simple terms. With each question, Sandra's smile grew wider. She thought she was watching a confused old man struggle with basic concepts. In reality, I was memorizing every forged signature, every false claim, every illegally obtained document. "This says I agreed to a mental evaluation last month," I noted, pointing at one page. "I don't remember that." "Of course you don't," Paul said smoothly. "That's part of the condition. Memory lapses are common. Dr. Morrison conducted the evaluation during your routine physical. You probably thought it was just normal questions. Except I hadn't had a routine physical last month. My doctor had been treating Margaret and I'd postponed all my appointments. Another lie to add to their growing pile. Where does it say what happens to the company?" I asked, shuffling through pages slowly. Sandra's patience was wearing thin. "It transfers to Thomas as Margaret wanted. She told me before she died that she wanted her son to have everything. You were there, Thomas. Tell your father what she said." Thomas looked up from his half-empty shake, confusion clouding his features. "Mom said," she said. He frowned, struggling to remember something that never happened. "She said she wanted you to take care of the company," Sandra prompted. "Remember in the hospital?" Yes, I think so." Thomas agreed, though uncertainty colored his voice. My heart ached watching my son being manipulated so brazenly. The boy who'd once challenged every assumption, who'd inherited his mother's sharp mind, reduced to parroting lies. "What about James?" I asked suddenly. "What's his role in all this?" Sandra's eye twitched almost imperceptibly. "James is still young. He'll have opportunities once he's proven himself. This is about securing the company's future now." "He loves that company," I pressed. "Margaret always said he reminded her of me at that age." "Well, Margaret's gone," Sandra snapped, then caught herself. "I mean, we have to think practically about who's ready for responsibility now." One of the witnesses shifted uncomfortably. She'd caught the coldness in Sandra's tone. I filed that away as potentially useful. Paul cleared his throat. "Mr. Turner, I think we're getting off track. The simple fact is you're 68 years old, recently widowed, and showing signs of decline. The board of directors will expect stable leadership. If you sign these papers now, we can ensure a smooth transition without any embarrassing public scrutiny." "The board," I acted surprised. "They know about this." "Not yet," Sandra said quickly. "But they will if you force us to take this public. Do you really want your legacy to be a messy court battle, where your mental state is questioned in front of everyone? Think about what Margaret would want." The invocation of my wife's name from the woman who'd called her the old bat made my jaw clench, but I maintained my facade. As I reached for the pen, Paul offered, pretending my hand was shaking too much to grip it properly. The doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said, starting to rise. "No!" Sandra almost shouted. "I mean, we're in the middle of something important. Let them come back later." But James was already walking past the dining room toward the front door. "I've got it, Grandpa." Sandra's face flushed. Her son wasn't supposed to be home. She'd mentioned earlier that he had classes all afternoon. But James had been skipping classes to help me prepare for this moment, though his mother didn't know that. "Sorry to interrupt," James called out. "Grandpa, there's someone here who says it's urgent. Something about Mom's car." Sandra went pale. "My car? What about my car?" James reappeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "He says he's from the insurance company. Something about an accident claim from last Wednesday night." "Last Wednesday night? The night Margaret died?" "There must be some mistake," Sandra said, starting to stand. "I wasn't in any accident." "Then why is there a damage claim filed?" James asked innocently. "And why does the hospital parking garage have footage of you leaving in a hurry at 3:47 a.m.? The silence in the room was deafening. Even Thomas, in his drugged haze, looked confused. "You said you were home all night," he said slowly. "You said the hospital called you the next morning." There's an explanation," Sandra stammered, but Paul was already packing up his documents. "I think we should postpone this meeting," the lawyer said quickly. "My client needs to address this insurance matter." "Actually," I said, my voice suddenly steady and clear, "I think we should finish what we started. After all, Sandra, you were so concerned about my mental state. Surely you want to make sure everything is properly documented." I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages. "Oh, look at that. Harold just texted. He says he's finishing up reviewing the security footage from the hospital. Something about visitor logs not matching the camera records." Sandra's carefully constructed mask finally cracked. "You senile old fool, you think you can threaten me? I've been planning this for years. Thomas, tell him." But Thomas was staring at his protein shake with growing horror. "These shakes, they're from Derek's clinic, aren't they? The one you said was helping with my stress." "Baby, you're confused," Sandra started, but James cut her off. Is that why you've been meeting Derek at the Marriott every Tuesday and Thursday? He held up his phone showing a photo of Sandra and Derek entering a hotel together. I was worried about Dad, so I started following you. Imagine my surprise. The two witnesses were already backing toward the door, clearly wanting no part of whatever was unfolding. Paul grabbed his briefcase, muttering about needing to review case law. "This isn't over," Sandra snarled, abandoning all pretense. "That company belongs to us. Margaret promised—" "Actually," I said, standing with surprising steadiness, "Margaret left very specific instructions about the company, but we'll discuss those at the official will reading, with proper lawyers present, and perhaps a few investigators who have questions about your recent activities." Sandra lunged for the documents on the table, but I was faster gathering them up along with the protein shake Thomas had been drinking. "I think we'll have this tested if you don't mind. Harold knows an excellent laboratory." "You can't prove anything," she spat, but fear flickered in her eyes. "Maybe not," I agreed. "But Margaret could. You really should have been more careful during those late-night hospital visits. She was dying, not deaf. And she was certainly still smart enough to ask the nurse to save those interesting IV bags you kept trying to swap out." Thomas stood unsteadily, supported by James. "Dad, what's she talking about? What IV bags?" I met my son's confused gaze with compassion. "We'll talk about everything soon, son. Right now you need medical attention. Those supplements you've been taking, they're not what she told you they were." As Sandra stormed out, followed by her fleeing brother, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over, old man. I'll destroy you." "You're welcome to try," I replied calmly. "But you should know Margaret anticipated this moment. She left you a message, actually. She said to tell you that the DNA test results make for fascinating reading." Sandra's face went white as paper before she slammed the door behind her. Thomas collapsed back into his chair. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't understand what's happening." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You will, son. But first we're getting you to a real doctor. And then—" I looked at James, who stood protectively near his father, despite everything he'd learned. "Then we're going to have a long family conversation about truth, loyalty, and what Margaret discovered about all of us. The battle was far from over, but round one belonged to Margaret's careful planning, and a grandfather who'd learned that sometimes the best defense is letting your enemy think you're defenseless. As I helped my son to the car, I whispered a quiet thank you to my brilliant wife. Even in death, she was still protecting our family. The 48 hours following Sandra's failed ambush were a whirlwind of revelations. After getting Thomas to the hospital, where doctors confirmed he'd been systematically drugged, with a cocktail of sedatives and mood suppressors, I met with Robert Carlson at a discreet location downtown. "Bjar, Mr. Turner." Robert began sliding a thick folder across the table of the private room at the Union Club. "What I'm about to show you goes deeper than we initially thought. The first document was a marriage certificate from Nevada, dated 12 years before Sandra married Thomas. Sandra Mitchell, except that wasn't her name then. She was Sandra Coleman, married to an elderly businessman named George Whitfield. What happened to him? Died under suspicious circumstances 2 years later. Apparent heart failure, though the family suspected foul play. No autopsy was performed, and Sandra inherited close to $2 million. The money disappeared within 6 months, and she reinvented herself as Sandra Mitchell, moving to our state. I studied the photographs of a younger Sandra with the silver-haired Whitfield. The pattern was chillingly familiar. "There's more," Robert continued. "She was investigated for elder abuse, but the charges were dropped when key witnesses suddenly became reluctant to testify. One of them, Whitfield's nurse, left the country entirely after receiving a large sum of money from an untraceable source. So Thomas wasn't her first victim. Not even close. We found traces of at least 2 other relationships with older men that ended badly. She's refined her technique over the years." Robert pulled out another set of documents. "But this is what Margaret really wanted you to see. The papers were from a genetics testing company dated 3 months before Margaret's death. My hands trembled as I read the results. James, our beloved grandson, shared no genetic markers with Thomas. Margaret suspected for years, Robert explained gently. James was born exactly 9 months after Thomas's business trip to Japan, the one Sandra insisted on joining at the last minute. She'd been having an affair with Derek Morrison even then. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That bright, loyal boy who'd stood by us wasn't even Thomas's son. And yet, did it matter he'd chosen to help us to stand with family against the woman who'd raised him? Does Sandra know we know? Unknown. But Margaret was strategic about this. She had me run the test through a private laboratory using hair samples from James's old baseball cap and Thomas's razor, completely admissible in court if needed. I moved to the next section of documents' financial records, showing a complex web of transactions. Sandra had been brilliant in her theft-keeping individual amounts, below reporting thresholds, using multiple accounts, creating false vendor payments through Thomas's restaurant partnership with Derek. How much in total? Over the past 5 years, close to $4 million. She's been bleeding him dry while keeping him too drugged to notice. The restaurant was never meant to succeed. It was a money laundering operation from day one. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. Security footage is revealing. Meet me at the office in 1 hour. Bring Frank. I looked at Robert. What about the hospital? The night Margaret died. His expression darkened. The parking garage footage shows Sandra arriving at 2:15 a.m. and leaving at 3:47 a.m. Visitor logs show no entry, which means she either snuck in or bribed someone. The head nurse from that shift, Maria Rodriguez, remembers seeing someone matching Sandra's description near Margaret's room, but can't be certain. She's willing to testify about the IV bag situation, though. IV bag situation. Margaret reported that someone kept trying to adjust her pain medication doses. The nurse found evidence of tampering twice and reported it to hospital security. They increased monitoring, but... He shrugged. Hard to prove intent. I gathered the documents carefully. Everything Margaret had suspected was true, and worse. My brilliant wife had spent her final months playing detective, while cancer ravaged her body, all to protect a family that was falling apart around her. An hour later, I sat in Harold's law office with Frank beside me. My brother had maintained his judicial composure through my initial explanation, but I could see the fury building behind his calm exterior. This is attempted murder, Frank stated flatly after viewing the hospital footage. At minimum, it's assault with intent to harm. Harold nodded, pulling up more files on his computer. It gets better, or worse depending on your perspective. I've been digging into Sandra's brother Paul. He's not just disbarred, he's been involved in 3 separate elder abuse cases, all representing family members trying to take control of estates. His usual move is to claim mental incompetence. Any convictions? No, but plenty of settlements. He's smart enough to avoid criminal charges, usually settling for civil payouts. But here's the interesting part. Harold turned his monitor toward us. 2 of his previous cases involved Dr. Derek Morrison providing medical testimony about cognitive decline. The web of corruption was staggering. Sandra hadn't just planned to steal from us, she'd assembled a team of professionals to do it. What's our next move? I asked. Frank leaned forward. The official will reading is tomorrow. Let them come. Let Sandra think she still has a chance. Meanwhile, I'll contact the district attorney. With the financial fraud alone, we have enough for criminal charges. The attempted murder investigation will take longer, but it'll happen. What about Thomas? I asked. He's been victimized here too. Thomas is lucky to have you as a father, Harold said gently. Most people would write him off as complicit. The fact that you see him as a victim speaks volumes. But Leo, you need to prepare yourself. When addicts come off the cocktail of drugs he's been on, withdrawal can be ugly. He might lash out, might even side with Sandra initially. He's my son, I said firmly. I won't abandon him now. My phone rang. James's name appeared on the screen. Grandpa? His voice was tense. Mom's here at the house. She's trying to get Dad to leave the hospital. She's saying you're trying to poison him against her. Where are you? In Dad's room. She doesn't know I'm on the phone. Grandpa, she's acting crazy. She keeps talking about the DNA test, saying you're lying, that you're trying to steal me away from her. So she did know, or at least suspected. James, listen carefully. Press the nurse call button. Tell them you need security. Your mother is not allowed to remove your father from medical care. But what if she's right? What if I'm not? You're my grandson, I interrupted firmly. Biology doesn't change that. Your grandmother loved you from the moment you were born, and so do I. Now press that button. I heard commotion in the background, Sandra's voice rising in anger, then James saying something about security being on the way. We need to get to the hospital, I told Frank and Harold. As we drove, Harold made phone calls ensuring hospital security was fully briefed. Frank contacted his connections in law enforcement. By the time we arrived, 2 police officers were already in Thomas's room, Sandra between them. This is kidnapping, she screamed when she saw me. You can't keep me from my husband. Ma'am, you've been asked to leave by the patient, one officer said calmly. That's his right. I looked past her to where Thomas sat in his hospital bed, looking more alert than he had in months. The doctors had begun flushing the drugs from his system, and while he was clearly struggling, his eyes held a clarity I hadn't seen in years. Dad, he said weakly. I think I need help. You've got it, son. Sandra lunged toward me, but the officers held her back. I'll destroy you, all of you. That company is mine. I earned it. 15 years of my life wasted on this pathetic family. Actually, Harold said, stepping forward with a document. You might want to save your energy for your arraignment. Officers Ms. Mitchell is wanted for questioning in connection with financial fraud, elder abuse, and attempted murder. As the officers read Sandra her rights, she turned to James with desperate eyes. Baby, tell them. Tell them I'm your mother. Tell them this is all a mistake. James stood tall, looking far older than his 18 years. I know exactly who you are, he said quietly, and I know who I choose to be. The officers led Sandra away, her threats echoing down the hospital corridor. As silence settled over the room, Thomas reached for my hand. Dad, I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool. You've been a victim, I corrected. But that ends now. Tomorrow we face whatever comes at the will reading, together as a family. Frank put his hand on my shoulder. Margaret would be proud. I thought of my wife's meticulous planning, her determination to protect us even while facing death. She saw all of this coming, every bit of it. Not all of it, Harold said with a slight smile. She couldn't have predicted James would be the hero of this story. That's all him. I looked at my grandson, who was adjusting Thomas's pillows with gentle care. DNA be damned. Margaret had been right about him from the start. He had more courage than any of us, and in the end, that courage had made all the difference. The war wasn't over. Sandra would fight with everything she had. But for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt hope. We'd weather this storm because Margaret had taught us how to be strong, how to protect each other, and most importantly, how to recognize that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Tonight, though, we'd won something precious, the truth, and with it, the chance to rebuild. The morning of the official will reading arrived crisp and clear. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, noting the exhaustion etched on my face, but also the determination in my eyes. Thomas had insisted on attending despite doctors' warnings about the stress on his system. James drove us, having stepped into a protector role with remarkable grace. Harold's law firm occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian Tower downtown. We arrived early, but Sandra was already there, flanked by a new attorney, someone far more polished than her brother Paul. She wore designer black, playing the wronged widow role to perfection, despite being out on bail. Leo, she said, coolly, as if the hospital incident hadn't happened. I hope you're satisfied with destroying our family." I didn't respond, instead helping Thomas to a chair. He was shaking slightly, the withdrawal symptoms still evident, but his jaw was set with determination. The conference room filled quickly. Harold had invited specific people at Margaret's request: Frank, several board members from Turner Aerospace, our personal banker, and surprisingly Maria Rodriguez, the nurse from Margaret's final days. Sandra's eyes narrowed when she saw Maria, but she maintained her composure. Harold began formally. "We're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Margaret Ann Turner, dated 2 years ago, with a video codicil added 2 weeks before her passing." Sandra's attorney, introduced as Richard Blackwood, immediately objected. "We contest the validity of any recent changes. Mrs. Turner was under heavy medication and clearly influenced by parties with their own interests." "Noted," Harold replied smoothly. However, the video was witnessed by 3 medical professionals who have sworn affidavits regarding Margaret's mental clarity at the time of recording. He began reading the standard bequests: charitable donations, personal items to friends, Margaret's jewelry, to be held in trust for James's future wife. Sandra shifted impatiently, waiting for the main event. Now, regarding Turner Aerospace Technologies, Harold continued, "Margaret Turner, as co-founder and 50% shareholder, hereby places her shares in an irrevocable trust with the following conditions." Sandra leaned forward, her mask slipping slightly. "The trust shall be managed by Leo Turner and Franklin Turner, jointly, with distributions made according to specific criteria. Thomas Turner shall receive quarterly payments from the trust's earnings, provided he maintains sobriety and participates in approved medical treatment for a minimum of 1 year." "What?" Sandra burst out. "That's not. Thomas inherits directly, Margaret told me." "Please allow me to finish," Harold said firmly. "Furthermore, any attempt to circumvent these conditions through legal manipulation, coercion, or fraud will result in immediate forfeiture of all benefits." Thomas spoke for the first time. "I agree to the conditions. I need the help." Sandra turned on him viciously. "Shut up! You don't know what you're saying! You're still sick!" "I'm getting better," Thomas replied quietly. "For the first time in years, I can think clearly." Harold cleared his throat. "There's more. Margaret specified that in the event of any family member attempting to harm Leo Turner physically or financially, all trust benefits would be immediately transferred to the Margaret Turner Foundation for Elder Care." "This is ridiculous," Blackwood interjected. "We'll challenge every word of this in court." "You're welcome to try," Harold said mildly. "But first, perhaps you should see Margaret's video message." The large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. Margaret appeared frail but fierce, propped up in her hospital bed. The date stamp showed exactly 2 weeks before her death. "If you're watching this," Margaret's recorded voice filled the room, "then Sandra has shown her true colors at last." Sandra went rigid in her chair. "I want everyone to understand that I am of sound mind as I record this. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Dr. Robert Chen, and Nurse Maria Rodriguez are here as witnesses." The camera panned to show all 3 medical professionals nodding. Margaret continued. "Sandra Mitchell Turner, I've known about your schemes for quite some time. The private investigator I hired has documented your theft, your affair with Derek Morrison, and your systematic drugging of my son." Gasps came from several board members who hadn't been privy to this information. "But that's not why I'm recording this." Margaret's eyes seemed to look directly at Sandra through the screen. "2 nights ago, you came to my room. You thought I was unconscious, but the pain medication doesn't work quite as well as you assumed. I heard every word you said about finally being free of the old baggage and your plans for the company." "This is fabricated," Sandra shouted, but her voice cracked. Margaret's image continued relentlessly. "You also made a critical error. You adjusted my IV drip, increasing the morphine flow. What you didn't know is that Maria had already documented 2 previous tampering attempts, and the bag you touched was marked with UV powder. The residue was found on your hands when you were arrested yesterday." I glanced at Maria, who nodded grimly. She'd been Margaret's secret weapon, a trusted ally who'd helped gather evidence even as my wife lay dying. But here's what really matters. Margaret said, her voice softening. James, my dear one, if you're listening to this, know that I've loved you as my grandson from the day you were born. Biology means nothing compared to the love you've shown this family. The blood test results are in Leo's possession, but they change nothing about who you are to us. James wiped his eyes, his composure finally cracking. Thomas, my son. Margaret continued, I failed you by not acting sooner. I watched that woman poison your body and mind, and I let my hope for your marriage blind me. Forgive me. But know that your father and I never stopped loving you, never stopped believing you'd find your way back. Thomas was crying openly now, years of suppressed emotion breaking through. And Sandra. Margaret's voice turned cold. I have a special message for you. The screen split, showing security footage from multiple angles. Sandra entering hospital rooms she wasn't authorized to access, meeting with Derek Morrison in the hospital parking garage, handling IV equipment without authorization. Every crime you committed was recorded. Every conversation you thought was private was captured. Did you really think I'd built a technology company without understanding surveillance? But the killing blow was yet to come. The screen changed to show a different recording, Sandra and Derek, in what appeared to be his office dated 6 months earlier. Once the old witch dies, Sandra's recorded voice said clearly, we can push Thomas over the edge, make it look like suicide. Grief-stricken son follows mother. Then everything goes to James, and as his mother, I control it all until he's 25. The room erupted. Board members jumped to their feet. Richard Blackwood was frantically whispering to Sandra, whose face had gone gray. Frank was already on his phone with the district attorney. The video Margaret appeared one final time. I protected my family the only way I knew how, by letting you reveal yourself, Sandra. Your greed, your cruelty, your complete lack of humanity, all documented for the world to see. You thought you were hunting us, but we were hunting you. Leo, she said, finally looking directly at the camera with such love that my heart broke all over again. Be strong, my darling. Our family's legacy isn't the company or the money. It's the love we share and the courage to protect each other. I'll be watching over all of you. Always. The screen went dark. In the silence that followed, Sandra stood slowly, her designer facade finally crumbling entirely. You destroyed me, she said, looking at me with naked hatred. All of you. No, I replied quietly. You destroyed yourself. Margaret just made sure there would be evidence. 2 police officers entered the conference room. The additional charges, attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder, were read as Sandra was handcuffed. This time there would be no bail. As they led her away, she turned to James one last time. I'm your mother, she screamed. You owe me everything. James stood tall, looking so much like Margaret in that moment it took my breath away. My mother died of cancer 2 weeks ago, he said firmly. You're just someone who gave birth to me. After Sandra was gone, the room slowly settled. Harold continued with the will's provisions, including a generous trust for James's education and a scholarship fund in Margaret's name. The board members expressed their support for the company's leadership structure. Thomas would begin intensive therapy and treatment with the family's full support. As the meeting concluded, Maria Rodriguez approached me. Mr. Turner, your wife was the bravest woman I've ever met. Even in her final days, she was thinking of others, planning to protect you all. She was remarkable. I agreed. Thank you for helping her, for being her ally when she needed one. Maria handed me an envelope. She asked me to give this to you after everything was resolved, said you'd know when the time was right. That evening, after Thomas was settled at a private rehabilitation facility and James had returned to his dorm room, I sat alone in Margaret's greenhouse. Her orchids bloomed around me, a riot of color she'd never see again. I opened Maria's envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph, Margaret and me on our wedding day, young and full of hope. On the back, in her careful handwriting, "My dearest Leo, if you're reading this, then our plan worked. I'm so proud of you for being strong enough to appear weak, clever enough to let our enemies defeat themselves. You've saved our family just as I knew you would. Please don't mourn too long. Live, love, laugh, help Thomas heal, guide James into manhood. Find joy in each day because that's what I want for you. You gave me 45 beautiful years. I used my last months to give you and our family a lifetime of protection. Fair trade, don't you think? Until we meet again, all my love, your Margaret." I held the photo to my chest and wept not from sadness but from gratitude. Even facing death, my brilliant wife had orchestrated our salvation. Sandra had thought she was preying on a weak, dying woman and her elderly husband. Instead, she'd walked into a carefully constructed trap built by love, determination, and the fiercest protective instinct I'd ever known. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Thomas's recovery, James's adjustment to the truth about his parentage, the company's future, all of it lay ahead. But tonight, surrounded by Margaret's flowers, I felt her presence and her approval. We'd won. Not through violence or cruelty, but through patience, intelligence, and the unbreakable bonds of true family. It was exactly how Margaret had planned it. The courtroom was packed on that unseasonably warm November morning. 6 weeks had passed since the will reading, and Sandra's criminal trial had drawn media attention from across the state. The story of the wealthy daughter-in-law who'd attempted to murder her way to a fortune was irresistible to the press. I sat in the front row with Thomas and James Frank beside us in his formal judicial bearing. Thomas looked healthier than he had in years, the intensive therapy and medical treatment having restored much of his former vitality. His hands no longer shook, and his eyes were clear, though pain still lingered there from the betrayal he'd endured. Harold Brennan was serving as a special prosecutor, given his intimate knowledge of the case. Sandra sat at the defense table, her appearance dramatically altered from her former polished self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple gray suit. Her attorney, Richard Blackwood, had been replaced by a public defender after her assets were frozen. "The prosecution calls Leo Turner to the stand," Harold announced. As I walked to the witness chair, I caught Sandra's eye. The hatred there was palpable, but underneath it I saw something else: fear. Harold's questioning was methodical, establishing the timeline of events, Margaret's illness, and the discovery of Sandra's schemes. Then came the moment we'd been preparing for. "Mr. Turner, did you bring the evidence your wife asked you to preserve?" I produced the small locked box Margaret had given me. "Everything is here, including the DNA test results that prove James is not my son's biological child." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The public defender objected strenuously, but the judge allowed it, given its relevance to motive. "When did you first see these results?" Harold asked. "The morning of the will reading. Margaret had left them in a safety deposit box with instructions to open them only when necessary." "And what else was in that box?" I pulled out a series of photographs. Pictures of Sandra with Derek Morrison dating back 15 years, including some from when she was supposedly visiting her sick mother in Florida. Financial records showing payments from Derek to Sandra throughout their marriage to my son. And this? I held up a small digital recorder. Margaret's personal recordings from the last month of her life. Sandra's face went white. Her attorney leaned over, whispering frantically. "Your Honor." Harold said, "We'd like to play recording number 12. The judge nodded. Margaret's voice, weak but determined, filled the courtroom. "October 15th, 3 a.m. Sandra just left my room. She thinks I'm unconscious, but I've been reducing my pain medication doses when the nurses aren't looking. I need to be clear-headed for this. She just told me quite calmly that she's been slowly poisoning Thomas with Derek's help." The protein shakes contain a cocktail designed to mimic depression and cognitive decline. She plans to have him committed after I die, take control of his assets, then arrange an accident. She actually laughed about it, said it worked perfectly with her first husband, and lightning does strike twice if you know how to aim it. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the gallery. Sandra had buried her face in her hands, realizing the full scope of Margaret's trap. "There's more, Your Honor," Harold said once order was restored. He nodded to the court clerk, who brought forward a new witness. Derek Morrison was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He'd been arrested 3 weeks earlier and had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. "Dr. Morrison," Harold began after he was sworn in, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant." Derek's voice was flat, defeated. "Sandra and I met 16 years ago at a medical conference. She was there with her first husband. We began an affair immediately." "And did you assist in her first husband's death?" "I provided the medications that induced his heart failure, made it look natural." More gasps from the gallery. Sandra shot him a look of pure venom. "What about your relationship during her marriage to Thomas Turner?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "We never stopped seeing each other. James is my son. The plan was always to eventually be together once we'd accumulated enough wealth. And the protein shakes. I formulated them specifically to induce symptoms of mental illness, paranoia, depression, memory loss, tremors. Administered over time, they would make anyone appear to be having a complete breakdown." Thomas gripped my hand tightly as Derek continued his testimony detailing years of deception, the restaurant scheme, the planned murder attempts. Each revelation was another nail in Sandra's coffin. But the most damaging moment came when Harold asked, "What happened the night Margaret Turner died?" Derek glanced at Sandra, then away. "Sandra called me at 2 a.m., said the old woman was weaker than expected, that we needed to accelerate the timeline. She asked me to prepare a concentrated dose of the medication. Said she would handle the delivery." "Did she report back to you?" "Yes. She called at 4 a.m., said it was done, but there'd been a complication. The nurse had nearly caught her. She was worried about the security cameras." Harold turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, those security cameras captured everything. You've seen the footage. You've heard the recordings. The defendant didn't just attempt to murder Margaret Turner. She succeeded in hastening her death, even if the cancer would have claimed her anyway." The defense's case was pitiful in comparison. Sandra's attorney tried to claim coercion, that Derek had manipulated her, that she was a victim herself. But when Sandra took the stand in her own defense, her arrogance destroyed any sympathy she might have garnered. "You all think you understand," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "That family had everything handed to them. The company, the wealth, the perfect life. What did I have? Nothing. I earned every penny I took. 15 years of pretending to love that pathetic man, of smiling at family dinners, of acting like I cared about their stupid company. So you admit to taking money?" the prosecutor pressed. Sandra laughed bitterly. "Taking? I earned it. Do you know what it's like to wake up every day next to someone you despise, to pretend their touch doesn't make your skin crawl? I deserved compensation." "And Margaret Turner, did she deserve to die?" For a moment, Sandra's mask slipped entirely. "She was already dying. I just helped nature along. She would have suffered more without my intervention." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: murder in the first degree, attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The judge, citing the heinous nature of the crimes and the defendant's complete lack of remorse, sentenced Sandra to life without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led her away, Sandra turned one last time. But instead of looking at me or Thomas, her eyes found James. "You'll be nothing without me," she spat. "Nothing." James stood slowly, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "I'd rather be nothing than be anything like you." Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was intense. But we pushed through a united family front. Thomas had his arm around James, publicly claiming him as his son, regardless of biology. Frank flanked us protectively, using his judicial presence to part the crowd. That evening, we gathered at my home for a quiet celebration. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Margaret's spirit was finally at peace. Harold and Robert Carlson joined us, along with Maria Rodriguez, who'd become a family friend through the ordeal. "I have something for you," Robert said, pulling out a tablet. "Margaret asked me to save this for after the trial." It was a video dated just days before her death. Margaret sat in her hospital bed looking frail but smiling. "Hello, my darlings," she said. "If you're watching this, then justice has been served and Sandra is where she belongs. I know this has been hard, especially for you, Thomas and James, but I want you to understand something." She paused, gathering strength. "Evil exists in this world. It wears beautiful faces and speaks honeyed words. It preys on kindness and exploits love. But evil's greatest weakness is its arrogance. It never believes that the weak can be strong, that the dying can still fight, that love is more powerful than greed. Thomas, my son, you are not weak for having been deceived. You loved with an open heart, and that's never wrong. Learn from this, grow stronger, but don't let it make you bitter. James, my precious grandson, biology is just science. Family is choice. You chose us, chose love over blood integrity over easy paths. Your grandfather and I couldn't be prouder." And Leo. Her eyes softened. "My partner, my love, my strength. You played your part perfectly. The confused old man who was actually 3 steps ahead. Take care of our boys. Live fully. And remember, I'm not really gone. I'm in every decision you make with wisdom, every moment you choose love over fear. I orchestrated all of this not for revenge, but for justice. Not from hatred, but from love." Sandra thought she was destroying our family. Instead, she helped us discover just how strong we really are. The video ended with Margaret blowing a kiss. "Until we meet again, my loves. Take care of each other." We sat in silence for a moment. Then James raised his glass of cider. "To Grandma Margaret, the strongest person I've ever known." And to Margaret was we echoed. As the evening wound down, I found myself in the greenhouse with Thomas. He was examining one of Margaret's orchids, a particularly beautiful purple specimen. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quietly. "For everything. For being weak, for not seeing what was happening, for letting her—" "Stop," I said firmly. "You were victimized by a master manipulator. The only person responsible for Sandra's crimes is Sandra." "How did Mom know?" he asked. How did she see what I couldn't? I thought about it. Your mother had a gift for seeing people clearly, but more than that, she trusted her instincts. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Sandra showed us glimpses of her true self over the years. Your mother was the only one watching closely enough to see the pattern. Thomas nodded slowly. I want to be better. For James, for you, for Mom's memory. You already are, I assured him. Every day you choose recovery. Every moment you choose truth over comfortable lies. You honor her memory. James appeared in the doorway. Grandpa, the news wants a statement. Should I tell them to leave? I considered it, then shook my head. No, let's give them one. Margaret deserves to have her story told properly. We walked out together, 3 generations united by loss, but strengthened by love. The cameras rolled as I spoke. My wife, Margaret Turner, was a remarkable woman. Faced with her own mortality, she chose to use her remaining time to protect her family from a predator. She gathered evidence, built alliances, and created an unbreakable net of justice. She did this while fighting cancer, while in tremendous pain, while others plotted against her. Her message to other families is simple. Trust your instincts. Protect your vulnerable. Don't let politeness or family pressure silence your concerns. And remember, true strength isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's the quiet voice that says, I will not let evil win. To those who would prey on the elderly, the sick, or the trusting, know this: we are watching. We are learning, and we will protect our own. The reporters shouted questions, but we were done. As we walked back to the house, James slipped his hand into mine, a gesture he hadn't made since he was a small boy. "Grandpa," he said softly, "do you think Grandma knew how it would all turn out?" I squeezed his hand, thinking of my brilliant, fierce, loving wife. I think she knew exactly how it would turn out. She knew that love would win, that family would survive, and that justice would prevail. She knew because she made sure of it. As we entered the house, I felt a warm breeze despite the cool evening carrying the faint scent of orchids. Margaret's presence blessing our new beginning. 6 months after Sandra's conviction spring had returned to bring new life to Margaret's greenhouse. I stood among the blooming orchids preparing for a day I'd never imagined would come, yet one that felt perfectly right. The doorbell rang, and I heard James call out, "I've got it, Grandpa." Our home had transformed in the months since the trial. Where once tension and secrets had poisoned the atmosphere, now laughter and honest conversation filled the rooms. Thomas had not only maintained his sobriety, but had thrown himself into therapy with determination that would have made his mother proud. He'd even started attending business meetings again, slowly learning the company operations he'd been kept from for so long. "Zamat!" Thomas appeared in the greenhouse doorway, looking healthier than he had in a decade. "The lawyers are here. Are you ready?" Today, we were signing the papers that would formally adopt James, acknowledging what our hearts had always known, that family is about choice, not just DNA. Derek Morrison's parental rights had been terminated as part of his plea deal, and James had eagerly requested the adoption. "Just one moment," I said, carefully cutting 3 perfect orchids from Margaret's collection. One purple one, white one deep pink, her favorites. The living room was full of people who'd become our extended family through this ordeal. Harold Brennan was there to handle the legal aspects, of course, but also Maria Rodriguez, who'd become a regular at our Sunday dinners. Robert Carlson had brought his wife to celebrate with us. Even Frank had driven in from his retirement home, bringing his famous apple pie. James stood in the center of the room, no longer the conflicted boy caught between loyalty and truth, but a young man who'd chosen his path with courage. He wore the watch Margaret had left him, a piece that had belonged to my father and was meant to pass from grandfather to grandson. "Before we sign these papers," I said, handing James the purple orchid, "I want to share something your grandmother wrote." I pulled out a letter Margaret had hidden in her jewelry box, one I'd found just last week, while helping James look for cufflinks for a formal event. "My dearest James," I read aloud, "I'm writing this on your 5th birthday, watching you play in the garden. You've just spent an hour explaining to me why rockets need pointy tops to go fast, complete with sound effects and dramatic gestures. Your father Thomas is inside and your mother is somewhere else as usual. But you don't notice her absence because you're too busy being brilliant and joyful and perfectly yourself. I've known the truth about your biological origin since before you were born. I saw the way Derek Morrison looked at Sandra when she was pregnant, saw the guilty glances and hidden smiles. But here's what I need you to understand. The moment you were placed in my arms, you became my grandson. Not by blood, but by something far more powerful, love at first sight. I've watched you choose kindness when others chose cruelty. I've seen you protect smaller children on the playground and share your lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. I've observed you sitting with your grandfather for hours, absorbing his stories about building rockets and reaching for the stars. You are a Turner in every way that matters. Someday, you may learn truths that shake your world. When that day comes, remember this. You were loved unconditionally from your first breath. You were chosen, claimed, and cherished by people who saw your soul and recognized it as family. Biology is accident. Family is intention. Live boldly, my precious boy. Love freely, and know that wherever I am, I'm proud of the man you're becoming. All my love, Grandma Margaret. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when I finished. James wiped his face, then stood straighter. She always knew, didn't she? She always knew everything. She did, I confirmed. And she loved you for exactly who you are. The adoption papers were signed with flourishes and witnessed by people who'd seen our family at its worst and chose to stand by us. As Harold notarized the final document, James officially became James Thomas Turner, carrying both his father's and grandfather's names forward. Speech, Frank called out, raising his coffee mug. The newest official Turner should say something. James laughed, still wiping his eyes. I'm not good at speeches, but I'll try. He took a breath, looking around the room. 6 months ago, I thought I was losing everything. My family was falling apart. My mother turned out to be. He paused, then continued more firmly. But I learned that sometimes things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt stronger. He turned to Thomas. Dad, you've shown me that admitting weakness takes the greatest strength. Watching you fight for your sobriety, for our relationship, for a better life, it's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Thomas pulled his son into a fierce hug, both of them crying now without shame. And Grandpa James continued, turning to me. You and Grandma taught me that real love protects without controlling, fights without destroying, and sometimes wins by appearing to lose. You could have exposed Sandra years ago, but you waited, planned, and made sure Dad and I would survive the truth. That's not just love. That's wisdom. He raised his own mug filled with Maria's homemade lemonade. To Margaret Turner, who orchestrated our salvation from beyond the grave, to broken families that choose to heal, and to the truth that set us free even when it hurt. To Margaret, everyone chorused. As the afternoon wore on, Harold pulled me aside. Leo, there's something else. The investigation into Sandra's first husband has been reopened. With Derek's testimony and the patterns established in Margaret's case, they're building a strong murder case. Will that affect James? I asked, concerned. No. If anything, it further distances him from her. The woman was a serial predator. James was just another tool in her schemes, never a son. Harold smiled. That young man in there, he's got Turner written all over him. Margaret saw it from the start. Later, I found myself alone with Thomas in my study. The walls were covered with photos of our company's achievements, rockets we'd designed, satellites we'd launched. But the newest additions were simple family photos from the past 6 months. Thomas helping James with college applications. All of us at Thomas's 90-day sobriety celebration. Sunday dinners with our extended chosen family. Dad, Thomas said quietly, I need to tell you something. I've been seeing a therapist who specializes in victims of long-term manipulation. She says what Sandra did to me, it's called coercive control. The drugs were just one part. She isolated me from you, and Mom made me doubt my own perceptions, created dependencies I didn't even recognize. I know, son, I've been reading about it too. The thing is, he continued, I'm starting to remember things. Comments Mom made that I dismissed. Warnings I ignored. Times you tried to reach out that Sandra sabotaged. I was so lost in the fog she created that I couldn't see the hands trying to pull me out. That's not your fault, I said firmly. I know. My therapist keeps reminding me. But Dad, I need you to know something. Even in my worst moments, even when I was parroting her lies about you being controlling or Mom being manipulative deep down, I knew it wasn't true. Some part of me always knew. I was just too weak to fight through the fog. You're not weak, I said. You survived 15 years of psychological torture. You're here sober rebuilding. That takes incredible strength. Thomas smiled a real smile that reached his eyes. Mom used to say that our greatest strength was each other. I didn't understand it then. I do now. That evening, as the sun set over the city, our family and friends gathered in the greenhouse for dinner. Maria had prepared Margaret's favorite meal, down to the lavender lemonade she'd loved. The table was set with the china Margaret had inherited from her mother, each piece carefully preserved. Before we eat, I said, standing at the head of the table, I want to announce something. After much discussion with the board and with Thomas, we've decided to create the Margaret Turner Innovation Center. It will provide resources for families dealing with elder abuse manipulation and coercive control. James will be interning there this summer before he starts college. Additionally, Thomas added, we're funding a scholarship program for students who've overcome family trauma to pursue careers in aerospace engineering. Mom always said the stars were for dreamers who dared to reach. We want to make sure nothing on earth prevents those dreamers from reaching. James stood up suddenly. Wait, there's more. I've been working on something. He pulled out a tablet showing architectural drawings. It's a design for Grandma's memorial garden at the Innovation Center. Every flower she loved arranged like a constellation map. The Pegasus constellation because she always said that's where imagination takes flight. I stared at the detailed plans, my throat tight with emotion. This boy we'd raised who'd faced the worst betrayal imaginable from his biological mother had channeled his pain into something beautiful. She would have loved it, I managed to say. As dinner progressed, filled with laughter and stories and the comfortable chaos of family, I felt Margaret's presence strongly. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living influence in the bonds between us, the courage we'd found, the love that had survived every assault against it. Robert Carlson raised his glass for a final toast as the evening wound down. 6 months ago, I watched a family in crisis. Tonight, I see a family reborn. To second chances, chosen families, and the women who see the future and prepare us for it. To Margaret, we said in unison. Later, as I walked through the quiet house after everyone had gone home or to bed, I stopped by Margaret's portrait in the hallway. We'd commissioned it from a photo taken in her greenhouse, surrounded by her orchids, smiling with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her own worth. We did it, my love, I whispered. We saved them all. Thomas is healing. James is thriving. The company is stronger than ever. Your innovation center will help countless families. Sandra will never hurt anyone again. A warm breeze swept through the hallway, despite all the windows being closed. The scent of orchids followed it, along with something else, the faintest hint of Margaret's perfume. I smiled, no longer questioning these moments. Love like ours doesn't end with death. It transforms, becoming the foundation upon which survivors build their new lives. Walking to my bedroom, I paused at James's door. He was video chatting with friends from school, laughing about something silly. Normal teenage life, the kind Sandra had tried to steal from him. At Thomas's door, I heard him on the phone with his sponsor, honestly discussing his daily challenges and victories. My boys were going to be okay. More than okay, they were going to soar. As I prepared for bed, I opened the drawer where I kept Margaret's final letter to me, the one I read every night. Leo, my greatest love, by the time you read this, the battle will be over, but the war will just be beginning. You'll have hard days ahead. Thomas will struggle. James will question everything. You'll wonder if the pain was worth it. It was. It always is when you're fighting for family. I've given you the tools, my darling. Use them wisely. Be patient with Thomas, he's more wounded than he knows. Be honest with James. He's stronger than he appears. And be kind to yourself, you're going to carry heavy burdens. But here's my final gift to you, permission to be happy. Don't mourn me so long that you forget to live. Find joy in small moments. Take that trip to Hawaii we always postponed. Teach James to build model rockets. Help Thomas rediscover his dreams. And if loneliness comes, remember that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. Opening your heart again doesn't diminish what we had. I chose you 50 years ago because I saw your strength disguised as gentleness, your wisdom wrapped in humility, your courage dressed as quiet determination. Nothing has changed. You are still that man, just with more gray hair and deeper laugh lines. Save our family, then save others. Turn our pain into purpose. Make my death mean something beyond the ending of one life. I'll be watching, probably critiquing your orchid care, and definitely laughing at your attempts to cook. But mostly I'll be loving you across whatever divide death creates. Until we meet again, remember love fiercely. Protect relentlessly. Live fully. Forever yours, Margaret. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Innovation Center needed planning. Thomas had a difficult therapy session scheduled. James had college interviews. Life would continue its complex dance of joy and sorrow, challenge and triumph. But tonight, in a house once poisoned by lies and manipulation, truth and love reigned supreme. A grandmother's fierce protection had saved us all. A family's courage had defeated evil. And somewhere in whatever realm awaits us after this life, Margaret Turner was smiling. The orchids in the greenhouse bloomed impossibly bright that night, as if celebrating their own quiet victory. Dear friends, if you've stayed with me through this journey, you've witnessed something powerful: how love can defeat greed, how wisdom can overcome manipulation, and how families can emerge stronger from even the darkest betrayals. My question for you is this: have you ever had someone in your life who, like Margaret, saw danger coming and protected you in ways you only understood later? What would you do to honor their memory and protect your own family? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to hear more stories of triumph over adversity. And if you know someone who needs to hear that families can survive anything with love and courage, please share this story with them. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. May you always have the wisdom to see truth, the courage to act on it, and the love to heal whatever wounds life brings your way. Until next time, hold your families close and remember the greatest inheritance we can leave our children isn't money or property, but the knowledge that they are unconditionally loved and the tools to protect themselves and others from those who would do them harm.